Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. I'm in front of Earl Roberts' house. It's that one there with that black door. This is his house here. So Earl Roberts of Kandahar was a celebrated British Army officer of the 19th century and into the early 20th century, though he actually served in the Army of the East India Company early in his career. He was born in Kanpur, India in 1832. I hope I pronounced it correctly. His father was a general, and Roberts was Irish on his father's side. I'm not sure about his mother's side. Anyway, he came back to the British Isles. He went to Eton, and then he went to Sandhurst, the Royal Military Academy. So he's commissioned as an army officer. But perhaps surprisingly, he joined the Army of the East India Company, not the British Army. Now, in the East India Company, they were better paid, but they really earned their pay because they were fighting a lot of the time on the northwest frontier. But to begin with, well, the East India Company just ruled the coasts of India. But by the time he was out there in the early 1850s, was well into the interior, really the whole of what we now call Bengal, West Bengal, Bangladesh, Uttar Pradesh, and getting up towards Delhi, fighting the Sikhs in the Punjab. By the Punjab, obviously meaning what's now the Pakistani Punjab, as well as the Indian Punjab and Haryana. So he was fighting there, and so that's why they were paid more. It was a hazardous pay, and obviously the tropical disease, which could easily kill people. Anyway, so the India Mutiny broke out in 1857, and he served with distinction there. He was a man of great fortitude, almost suicidal bravery at times. He killed at least 3 people by his own hand. I know you might consider it very distasteful, but he is a soldier. He's in a combat situation. That's what he was supposed to do, even if you disagree with his cause. So he's promoted. He spent 41 years in India with regular trips back to the British Isles. So he's promoted. He started out as a subaltern. Anyway, he eventually went back to Ireland for a while, was commander-in-chief in Ireland for a bit. He was married, he had children. He was a Protestant, presumably, of the Church of Ireland, stroke Church of England, but didn't particularly identify himself with Ireland. I'm not sure if he called himself Irish or not, though, even though he was certainly at least half Irish. Anyway, so he was serving in India again in 1879, the Second Anglo Afghan War, when the British ambassador to Afghanistan, Sir Louis Kavnagari, I hope I pronounced that properly, he was murdered, and obviously that's outrageous because you've got to respect diplomatic immunity. Diplomats are never harmed because we can only negotiate peace through diplomats. So if that's not respected, we can't end a conflict. So anyway, that he successfully invaded Afghanistan. It was a punitive expedition. The aim was not to control the country, and then left. So what else about Roberts? I remember when I was an undergraduate reading a biography about him, saying he was so full of grit and go, so characteristic of the Irish nation. Anyway, he had various other positions. He was the governor of Natal for a while. He was in South Africa in the Second South African War, 1899 to 1902, which soon became a guerrilla conflict, and the Afrikaner civilians were acting as the commissariat and the intelligence corps of the commandos. So by Afrikaners I mean the people of Dutch descent. They're whites, and their states were the Transvaal Republic and the Orange Free State, but they recognized the paramountcy of the British Empire. So were they fighting lawfully or unlawfully? If they're fighting unlawfully, then they weren't soldiers and could have been executed. The other thing is they almost never wore uniforms. They were outside the Geneva Convention. But nevertheless, they were very seldom put to death on their court. But the civilians sometimes chose to go to these concentration camps, which didn't have the terrible connotations it does now when those were set up. And no, they weren't the first concentration camps in the world. The Spanish had them in Cuba several years earlier. There's often that lie that the UK invented them. And then a lot of these civilians who moved to the concentration camps went there voluntarily because very little was produced. Livestock were being killed deliberately, accidentally, houses were being burnt down. The British Army saying, well, if these people are soldiers, any house they stay in any base, we're going to destroy it. They're going to use it again. You're providing them with food, you're carrying their ammunition. Well, we're going to destroy your house. We're going to have to intern you. So people were fed in the concentration camps, but they weren't forced to work. Not a single person was killed. Quite a few people died. About 20% of the people there died over 2.5 years of natural causes. But there was in sanitation. Sometimes they weren't even provided with soap. The trains supposed to supply them were often destroyed by the Afrikaners. Now, I don't blame them for that. Of course, it's a completely ethical tactic. But consequently, the British Army didn't have enough supplies for itself, and obviously didn't have enough supply for the internees. So finally, the conflict came to an end. So he came back. He was honoured. He'd been ennobled. He'd been made Earl Roberts of Kandahar, because of Kandahar in Afghanistan, the site of his greatest victory, and he had a title relating to Waterford, which is where his father's birthplace. And so he was retired after that. But he campaigned for the introduction of compulsory military service. He warned people that Germany is about to invade the United Kingdom. And William Quex's novel The Invasion of 1910 was largely inspired by him. He gave this tub-thumping speech in 1912 in Manchester Free Trade Hall, saying that people must be very alive to the perils posed by Germany. The UK was in jeopardy of being bested by Germany. Other people say this was Teutonophobic drivel, and that Germany was not a threat, was not bellicose, and really this sort of inflammatory rhetoric is the kind of thing that caused the First World War. So he supported the Ulster Volunteers, but felt too old to take command, and he suggested that they pick Richardson instead, who'd served in India with him. He was also a friend of Ian Hamilton, the commander at Gallipoli, who indeed got killed at Gallipoli in 1915. So he knew everyone who was anyone, very much respected by the royal family. And then when the First World War broke out, he returned to the colours. He was 82, but he died of natural causes. I think it was pneumonia at Saint-Omer, France, November 1914. And so he was very exalted. He lay in state in Westminster Hall. And in the 20th century, one of the commoners had that honour, and that was Sir Winston Churchill. So he's buried in St Paul's Cathedral. This equestrian statue is not of him, it's of Sir George White, who was his comrade in arms for some time in South Africa, for example. Okay, that's enough from me. Toodaloo.